I sat in the cramped security office of Westfield Shopping Center, staring at the sheet of paper Dan had handed me at the start of my shift. My first night on the job, and already things felt off. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I read through the list again, trying to make sense of it. "These rules will keep you safe, Morris," Dan had said, his face dead serious as he'd slid the paper across the desk. "Follow them exactly." I ran my finger down the list, stopping at the first item. Ignore anyone resembling Gordon Webber, the custodian, after midnight. Do not acknowledge or interact with him in any way. What kind of rule was that? I'd laughed when Dan first showed me, thinking it was some weird initiation ritual for new security guards. Every workplace had its jokes for the new guy. At my last job, they'd convinced me I needed to file daily reports on the vending machine inventory. "This is a joke, right?" I'd asked. Dan hadn't smiled. "Just follow the rules, kid." The office clock read 11:15 p.m. I tucked the paper into my pocket and grabbed my flashlight. Joke or not, I needed this job. The rent on my apartment wasn't going to pay itself, and security work was the best I could find with my limited experience. If playing along with their prank was part of the gig, I could handle it. I started my first patrol route, walking past darkened storefronts with mannequins frozen in fashionable poses. The mall had closed to shoppers at 9, but the cleaning crew was still working, vacuuming floors, emptying trash bins, wiping down surfaces. Near the food court, I spotted an older man in a blue uniform pushing a large floor buffer. He looked up as I approached. "You must be the new night guard," he said, extending his hand. "Gordon Webber. I handle the overnight cleaning." I shook his hand. "Melvin Morris, first night." Gordon nodded. "Dan's got you doing the graveyard shift, huh? Tough break for a new guy." "It's not so bad," I said, though the empty mall echoed strangely around us. "I'm used to being up late anyway." "Well, you won't see much of me," Gordon said, turning back to his buffer. "I'm always out by 11:30. Don't like being here after midnight." He gave me an odd look. Never did. I thought about the rule on my list. "Any particular reason?" Gordon just shrugged. "Place feels different at night, that's all. Anyway, good meeting you. Good luck with the job." I continued my patrol, making mental notes of emergency exits and security cameras. By the time I'd completed my first full circuit, the cleaning crew had packed up and left. The mall was completely empty now, just me and 50,000 square feet of retail space. The clock on my phone read 12:10 a.m. I'd been checking it regularly, curious about what would happen after midnight. Nothing seemed different. The same empty corridors, the same quiet hum of the ventilation system, the same soft muzak playing over the speakers. I was passing the west corridor when I heard it, the squeak of wheels on polished floor. I turned and saw a figure at the far end of the hall, pushing a mop bucket. The blue uniform was unmistakable. Gordon. Hadn't he said he always left by 11:30? I started to raise my hand in greeting when I remembered the first rule. Ignore anyone resembling Gordon Webber after midnight. The figure moved with strange, jerky motions, like someone who didn't quite know how their limbs worked. As it came closer, I could see it was definitely Gordon. Same face, same uniform, same build. But something was wrong. The movements weren't natural, and his eyes, they didn't blink. My heart jumped in my chest. This had to be part of the prank. Dan must have hired an actor to dress up like Gordon and walk around weirdly to freak me out. The fake Gordon pushed his mop bucket closer, the wheels making that distinctive squeak with each turn. I kept my eyes forward and walked past, pretending not to see him. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I felt him watching me. I kept walking, focusing on the sound of my own footsteps. Behind me, I heard the squeak of the mop bucket wheels turning to follow. I quickened my pace slightly, fighting the urge to look back. The squeaking followed me for several more steps, then suddenly stopped. When I finally dared to glance over my shoulder, the corridor was empty. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. This was an elaborate prank, I told myself. But why would Dan go to such lengths? And why did Gordon make that comment about not wanting to be here after midnight? I pulled out the list again, reading the first rule. The paper felt heavier somehow, more significant. Maybe these rules weren't a joke after all. I tucked the paper back into my pocket and continued my patrol, now hyper-aware of every sound in the empty mall. What other strange things might happen tonight? And more importantly, why did these specific rules exist in the first place? I continued my patrol through Westfield, clutching my flashlight in one hand and the rule sheet in the other. The mall felt even emptier now, with only the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional flicker of motion-sensing lights breaking the silence. My encounter with whatever had been pretending to be Gordon left me on edge, making each shadow look like a potential threat. The food court loomed ahead, its tables and chairs arranged in neat rows like some bizarre restaurant after closing. I slowed my pace, remembering the second rule on the paper. I pulled it out and read it again. Rule number 2. If you see a mannequin on the upper level after 1 a.m., maintain eye contact with it until 1:20 a.m. Do not break eye contact for any reason. If you do, run. I checked my phone. It was 1:05 a.m. Great timing. I carefully kept my gaze lowered as I entered the food court area, focusing on the tiled floor beneath my feet. The thought of looking up and seeing a mannequin watching me from the second floor railing made my skin crawl. I'd worked retail before. Mannequins were creepy enough during daylight hours, standing frozen in fashionable poses. The idea of one that needed to be watched, that might do something if I looked away. I didn't want to find out what would happen. I walked with measured steps, counting the floor tiles, studying the patterns of dirt that the cleaning crew had missed, anything to keep from looking up. The upper-level balcony circled the entire food court, and I could feel the weight of the empty space above me as I crossed the open area. My neck muscles tensed with the effort of not looking up. It was like fighting against a magnet pulling my eyes upward. I wanted to look, needed to look, but the memory of the fake Gordon's unblinking stare kept my head down. I made it through the food court without incident and let out the breath I'd been holding. I tucked the rule sheet back into my pocket and checked my phone again. 1:17 a.m. I'd managed to avoid the mannequin situation entirely. Maybe it wasn't even up there tonight. The next section of my patrol route took me toward the elevators. 3 of them stood side by side, their polished metal doors reflecting the dim emergency lighting. I approached slowly, remembering the third rule. Rule number 3. At 2 a.m., you will hear someone calling for help from the middle elevator. Press the call button, but do not look inside when the doors open. I checked my phone again. 1:45 a.m. I had 15 minutes before the elevator incident was supposed to happen. I decided to complete my patrol of the nearby shops first, keeping an eye on the time. The shuttered storefronts looked peaceful enough, metal gates pulled down and locked. I swept my flashlight across each one, checking for any signs of break-ins or other issues. Nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual displays of clothes, electronics, and housewares frozen in time until morning. As I circled back toward the elevators, a cold feeling settled in my stomach. It was 1:58 a.m., 2 minutes until whatever was going to happen with the elevator. I positioned myself about 20 feet from the bank of elevators, watching the middle one with growing unease. At exactly 2 a.m., I heard it. A woman's voice, muffled but clear enough to make out the words. "Hello? Is someone there? Please help me. I'm stuck in here." The voice sounded desperate, frightened. My first instinct was to rush forward, to help whoever was trapped inside. But Dan's warnings and the rule sheet in my pocket held me back. "Please." The elevator stopped, and I can't get out. "Is anyone there? Please help." I took a deep breath and approached the elevator, keeping my eyes fixed on the call button. My hand shook as I reached out and pressed it. The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open with a soft mechanical whir. I kept my eyes locked on the floor, fighting every natural instinct to look up and check on the person who needed help. The voice changed instantly. What had been a frightened woman's plea transformed into something deep, guttural, and unmistakably angry. "Why won't you look at me? Look at me!" The voice boomed through the corridor, no longer sounding remotely human. It was like several voices layered together, each one more distorted than the last. I took a step back, then another, forcing my legs to work despite the terror freezing my muscles. I turned and walked away, my back to the open elevator. "I know you're there. Turn around. Look at me." The voice followed me down the corridor, seeming to come from just behind my right shoulder. I quickened my pace, not quite running, but moving as fast as I could while still maintaining some semblance of control. My radio crackled to life, making me jump. "Marcus, you there? Everything going okay?" Dan's voice came through, steady and calm. I fumbled with the radio, nearly dropping it as I brought it to my mouth. Yeah, I managed, trying to keep my voice level, despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "Everything's fine." I could still hear the voice from the elevator, though it was growing fainter as I put distance between us. I wasn't about to tell Dan I was currently being followed by whatever unholy thing lived in the middle elevator. Good, Dan replied. "Just checking in. Remember rule number 4. If you see a man sitting on any of the benches, leave the premises immediately. Don't talk to him, don't look back, just get out. Got it?" "Got it," I said, my mouth dry. The radio went silent, and I was alone again with the fading voice from the elevator, and the knowledge that there were still more horrors waiting for me in this mall. I spotted him at 3:30 in the morning. A man in a dark suit sitting perfectly still on one of the benches in the central seating area. He didn't move, didn't shift, didn't even seem to breathe. Rule number 4 flashed through my mind. If you see a man sitting on any bench, leave the premises immediately. Don't talk to him. Don't look back. My hand shook as I grabbed my radio. The bench was between me and the main exit. I'd need to circle around through the west corridor to avoid passing directly in front of him. "Brandon," I said into the radio, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's a man on a bench in the central area." The radio crackled to life almost immediately. "Get out now." Brandon's voice was tight, urgent. "Don't look at him. Just go." I backed away slowly, then turned and walked as fast as I could without running toward the west corridor. The exit was at the far end, about 200 yards away. My footsteps echoed through the empty mall. The sound seemed to bounce off every surface, announcing my location. I kept my eyes fixed ahead, focusing on the red exit sign glowing in the distance. My breathing felt too loud in my ears. The hallway seemed longer than it had during my earlier patrols. The weight of someone watching pressed against my back. I could feel it, the sensation of eyes boring into me. But I didn't turn around. I remembered the rules. As I reached the halfway point, I heard something that made my skin crawl. The faint sound of dress shoes on tile somewhere behind me. A measured, unhurried pace. Following, I walked faster. The exit sign grew larger. 100 yards, 75, 50. The footsteps behind me stopped. The silence felt worse somehow. 25 yards, the door was right there. I could see the dark parking lot beyond the glass. I pushed the door open, feeling the cool night air hit my face. And then, in that moment of relief, I made a terrible mistake. I glanced back. The man had turned on the bench. He was looking directly at me from across the mall. Even at this distance, I could see his eyes catch the emergency lighting and reflect it back. 2 perfect circles of light, like an animal's eyes in headlights. I stumbled through the door and let it swing shut behind me. The parking lot was empty except for my car and Brandon's truck at the far end. I ran to my car, fumbling with my keys, dropping them once before managing to unlock the door. Once inside, I locked all the doors and started the engine. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. I pulled out my phone and called Brandon. He answered on the first ring. "Are you out?" "Yeah," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm in the parking lot." "Did you look back?" His voice was flat. I swallowed. "Yes." Brandon was quiet for a moment. "Go home. I'll come in early to check things out." "What was that thing?" I asked. "What are any of these things? The fake Gordon, the mannequin, the elevator voice?" "I don't know." Brandon cut me off. "I've worked here 8 years and I still don't know what they are. I just know the rules keep people safe." "But go home, Marcus. Get some sleep. I'll see you tomorrow night." He hung up before I could ask anything else. I drove home in a daze, checking my rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see reflective eyes staring back at me. When I got to my apartment, I double-checked all the locks and left the lights on while I tried to sleep. The next evening, I arrived for my shift 15 minutes early. Brandon was waiting in the security office, looking tired. "Everything's back to normal," he said as soon as I walked in. "Whatever that thing was, it's gone now. At least until the next time." "I can't do this," I said. "This job is weird, terrifying." "Yeah, I know." Brandon rubbed his eyes. "Look, if you want to quit, I get it. Most people don't last more than a week once they see what's really going on here. I wanted to quit. I should have quit. But rent was due in 2 weeks, and my bank account was nearly empty. Finding another night job that paid this well would take time I didn't have. "I'll stick with it," I said finally, "but I'm following the rules exactly." Brandon nodded. "That's all any of us can do." Over the next few weeks, I got better at navigating the mall's supernatural residents. I learned to patrol certain areas before specific times to avoid encounters. I memorized all the rules and kept the sheet folded in my pocket at all times. I still saw the fake Gordon most nights, pushing his squeaky mop bucket through the corridors after midnight. I still averted my eyes from the upper level after 1 in the morning to avoid seeing the mannequin. I still pressed the elevator button at 2 without looking inside when the doors opened. But I never saw the benchman again. Brandon told me that was normal. Some of the entities appeared regularly, others only occasionally. I started bringing a thermos of coffee and extra batteries for my flashlight. I downloaded podcasts to listen to during the quiet hours when nothing strange happened. I even began to develop a routine, marking off sections of the mall on my mental checklist as I completed each patrol. The fear never completely went away. I still jumped at unexpected sounds. I still felt my heart race whenever I had to follow one of the rules. But the terror became more manageable, a low hum of anxiety rather than the paralyzing dread I'd felt those first few nights. It was like living with a chronic illness. You never get used to it, not really. But you learn to function despite it. You adapt because you have to. And so I did. Night after night, I returned to the mall with its impossible residents, following the rules that kept me alive until morning. 3 months had passed since I started working as a night security guard at Westfield. The job that had once filled me with dread had become just another routine. My nights followed a predictable pattern. Patrol routes timed to avoid the strange entities that haunted the mall after hours. I'd gotten used to ignoring the fake Robert as he pushed his squeaky mop bucket around after midnight. I kept my eyes down when passing the upper level after 1 a.m. to avoid seeing any mannequins. At 2 o'clock, I dutifully pressed the middle elevator button when I heard the woman's cries for help, but never looked inside when the doors opened. The benchman hadn't reappeared since that first night, which Brandon said was normal. Some entities showed up less frequently than others. The fear hadn't completely gone away. It had just changed shape, from paralyzing terror to a dull background anxiety I could function around. I'd developed little coping mechanisms, downloaded podcasts for the quiet hours, brought a thermos of coffee to avoid using the break room alone, and kept extra batteries for my flashlight. I even had a mental checklist for each patrol route. What I hadn't figured out was what these things actually were. Brandon wasn't much help, Whenever I asked, he just shrugged and said, "Does it matter? The rules keep us safe." But it did matter to me. I wanted to understand why I was avoiding eye contact with mannequins and ignoring janitors. Were they ghosts? Something else? And why did they follow such specific patterns? I was on my 2 a.m. patrol, having just dealt with the elevator incident, when I noticed something odd near the service corridor. A door that was always locked stood slightly ajar. The maintenance tunnel entrance. In 3 months, I'd never seen it open. I stopped and stared at it for a moment. Protocol said I should radio Brandon about any security breaches. But Brandon was off tonight. His first sick day in the 8 years he'd worked here, according to him. I'd been left alone to handle the shift. I weighed my options. I could call Brandon at home, but he'd sounded terrible on the phone earlier. Besides, it was probably just someone forgetting to lock up. Maybe the real Robert before he left for the night. "I'll just check it out quickly," I muttered to myself, pushing the door open wider. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a concrete corridor that sloped gently downward. The air smelled musty and metallic. I took a few cautious steps inside, letting the door rest against my foot to prevent it from closing completely. The maintenance tunnels ran beneath the entire mall, connecting utilities and providing access to the underside of escalators and elevators. I'd seen them on the building schematics, but never had a reason to come down here. As I moved deeper, my flashlight beam caught something on the wall. I stepped closer, frowning. Strange markings had been drawn directly onto the concrete, symbols I didn't recognize. They looked like they'd been made with red paint, or something else that had dried a rusty brown color. I followed the markings, turning a corner, and then stopped dead in my tracks. My flashlight illuminated what could only be described as a shrine. It was built into a small alcove in the wall, a shelf-like space that had been decorated with candles, dried flowers, and what looked like personal items. But what made my blood run cold were the security badges arranged in a semicircle. Mall security badges. At least a dozen of them. I stepped closer, my hand shaking slightly as I directed the beam of my flashlight across the display. I recognized some of the names from stories Brandon had told. Guards who had quit suddenly or couldn't handle the night shift. James Woodley, Tara Chen, Miguel Santos, all former night guards, according to Brandon. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Why would someone collect old security badges and create this bizarre shrine? Was this connected to the entities somehow? A soft scraping sound from deeper in the tunnel made me freeze. I held my breath, listening. Another scrape, followed by what sounded like footsteps. Slow, uneven footsteps coming toward me. I didn't wait to see what was making the noise. I backed away quickly, then turned and half walked, half ran back the way I'd come. I pushed through the maintenance door, made sure it was firmly shut, and leaned against it, heart pounding. Just a rat, I told myself, trying to steady my breathing. Or a pipe settling. But I didn't believe it, not after everything I'd seen in this place. I needed to continue my patrol. I'd tell Brandon about the shrine when he came back. He might know what it meant. I turned away from the maintenance door and headed toward the central court, and stopped dead in my tracks. They were all there, all of them. Gathered together in the open area of the central court, the fake Robert stood motionless, his mop bucket beside him, hands gripping his mop with unnatural stillness. The mannequin I'd always avoided looking at had somehow moved from the upper level to the ground floor. The woman from the elevator, something I'd only ever heard but never seen, stood there too, her form flickering slightly like a bad TV signal. And sitting on a bench at the edge of the group was the man in the dark suit, the one I'd mistakenly looked back at 3 months ago. All of them, together, staring directly at me. This wasn't supposed to happen. The entities never appeared together. They had their own times, their own places, their own rules. I stood frozen, unable to look away as the 4 figures began to move toward me with jerky, synchronized steps. I ran. I sprinted down the corridor with my heart hammering in my chest, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the walls. Behind me, the four entities moved in perfect sync, their jerky movements somehow coordinated as they pursued me through the darkened mall. I rounded the corner toward the security office, fumbling with my keys as I ran. I could hear them getting closer. The squeak of fake Robert's mop bucket, the click of the benchman's dress shoes, and something else. A strange, static-like sound that must have been coming from the elevator woman. When I reached the security office, I jammed the key into the lock, twisted it, and practically fell inside. I slammed the door shut behind me, turned the deadbolt, and dragged the metal filing cabinet in front of it for good measure. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped my phone as I pulled it out. I hit Brandon's number on my contacts and pressed the phone to my ear, breathing hard. He answered on the second ring. "Marcus, what's wrong?" His voice was thick with sleep. "They're all out there," I gasped. All of them at once. Fake Robert, the mannequin, the elevator woman, and the benchman. They're all together, moving together. There was a moment of silence. Then I heard rustling like Brandon was sitting up in bed. When he spoke again, his voice had changed completely, tight with panic. "That's not possible. They never gather together. Never. Something is terribly wrong." "What do I do?" I asked, my voice cracking as I backed away from the door. "This isn't in any of the rules." "You must have broken something. Not one of the written rules, but something else," Brandon said, his words coming faster now. "Did you do anything different tonight? Anything at all?" I swallowed hard, thinking about the maintenance tunnel. I found a door open. The maintenance tunnel entrance. I went inside. "You what?" Brandon's voice exploded through the phone. "Jesus Christ, Marcus. You went into the tunnels? Fuck. What? What is it?" I pressed my back against the far wall, staring at the office door. I could hear something scratching at it now. "That's their sanctuary," Brandon said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "You disturbed their sanctuary. That's the one place we never go. Ever." "I didn't know. There's nothing in the rules about..." "Because it's unwritten. Some things I just assume nobody would be stupid enough to do." Brandon took a deep breath. "Listen to me. This is bad. Really bad. What are they? What do they want?" I asked. There was a long pause before Brandon answered. "I've been feeding them information about the new guards. That's why I give out the rules, to keep them satisfied. They need to know who's in their territory." The door to the security office shuddered as something slammed against it. The filing cabinet scraped a few inches across the floor. "What do you mean, feeding them information?" I demanded. "They select people to join them." Brandon's voice was barely audible now. "That's what they do." A cold realization washed over me as I remembered what I'd seen in the tunnel. The shrine, all those security badges. James Woodley, Tara Chen, Miguel Santos. You told me they quit. "They did, in a way," Brandon said quietly. "Oh my God," I whispered, the truth hitting me like a physical blow. The missing guards, they became the entities. They're the ones haunting the mall. The door shook violently now, the hinges starting to pull from the frame. I glanced at the security monitors and felt my blood freeze in my veins. On the screens, I could see all four entities outside the door, but they were changing. The fake Robert's face was stretching, his mouth opening impossibly wide. The mannequin's limbs were bending at unnatural angles. The elevator woman flickered in and out of view, each reappearance showing her more distorted than before. And the benchman, his suit seemed to be melting into his skin as his eyes grew larger and more reflective. "They're transforming," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Brandon, they're turning into something else, something worse." "They're preparing," Brandon said. "For you." I looked around the office desperately, searching for anything that might help me. My eyes fell on Brandon's desk, the bottom drawer slightly ajar. I'd never seen it open before. I pulled it open fully and found an old leather-bound journal wedged at the back. I grabbed it and flipped it open, scanning the yellowed pages covered in tight, cramped handwriting. "There's a journal here," I told Brandon. "In your desk." "The original security chief's journal," Brandon said. "I never had the guts to try what's in there." I flipped through the pages frantically until a passage caught my eye. "To banish the entities, their anchor to this world must be destroyed. Burn the shrine and seal the maintenance door with salt. The fire disrupts their connection. The salt prevents their return." The door splintered as one of the hinges tore free from the wall. "I know how to stop them," I said. "I need to burn the shrine and seal the door with salt." "You'll never make it to the tunnels," Brandon said. "They'll be guarding it now." "I have to try." I looked around the office and spotted the fire extinguisher on the wall. Not ideal for starting a fire, but I had my lighter. "I need salt. Is there any in the mall?" "Food court," Brandon said immediately. "The pretzel stand keeps big containers of it." The door buckled inward as the filing cabinet slid further across the floor. I had minutes, maybe seconds. "I'm going to make a run for it," I said, grabbing the fire extinguisher from the wall. "If I don't make it, just go," Brandon said. "And Marcus, I'm sorry." I hung up and pocketed the phone, gripping the fire extinguisher in both hands. I took a deep breath, then charged at the door, swinging the extinguisher like a battering ram. The weakened door burst outward, knocking back whatever was on the other side. I didn't stop to look. I sprinted past the entities, heading straight for the food court. Behind me, I heard inhuman shrieks and the sound of pursuit. I ran faster than I'd ever run in my life, my lungs burning as I pushed myself to the limit. The food court was just ahead. I vaulted over the counter of the pretzel stand, frantically searching the shelves until I found what I needed: 2 large containers of salt. I stuffed them into my pockets and turned to face the approaching entities. They were closing in from all sides, their forms now barely recognizable as humanoid. I had one chance. I had to make it to the maintenance tunnels. I took a deep breath, tightened my grip on the fire extinguisher, and charged toward the nearest gap between them, running straight for the maintenance door and what I hoped would be the end of this nightmare. I ran through the mall, fire extinguisher clutched tightly in my hands, the containers of salt banging against my leg in my pocket. The entities were closing in from all sides, their forms now barely recognizable as human. I spotted a narrow gap between the mannequin and the elevator woman and charged toward it, my lungs burning with each desperate breath. I dodged past their reaching limbs, feeling something cold brush against my arm as I broke through their circle. The maintenance tunnel door loomed ahead. I slammed my shoulder into it, nearly losing my balance as it swung open. The concrete corridor stretched before me, sloping downward into darkness. I stumbled forward, the echoes of inhuman shrieks following me as I descended deeper into the tunnel. My flashlight beam bounced wildly off the walls as I ran, illuminating those strange, rust-colored symbols that now seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. I rounded the corner, my heart hammering against my ribs, and there it was, the shrine built into the wall alcove. I skidded to a stop, my breath catching as I saw what was new among the collection of badges. Brandon's security badge now sat at the center of the semicircle, looking freshly placed. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He never came in this morning, I whispered to myself, the truth dawning with sickening clarity. The entities already took him. The badges seemed to watch me. James Woodley, Tara Chen, Miguel Santos, and now Brandon. All of them trapped, transformed into the horrors that stalked the mall at night. I set down the fire extinguisher and frantically searched the nearby shelves where maintenance supplies were stored. I found what I needed: a bottle of industrial cleaner and a can of lubricant spray, both flammable. I grabbed them and hurried back to the shrine. The sounds from above grew louder. They were coming. My hands shook as I unscrewed the caps and doused the shrine, soaking the badges, dried flowers, and candles. I pulled out my lighter, a cheap plastic one I kept for emergencies, and flicked it several times before a flame finally caught. "This ends now," I said, touching the flame to the edge of the shrine. The fire caught instantly, blue-orange flames leaping up to consume the badges. A chorus of inhuman shrieks echoed throughout the mall, so loud I had to cover one ear while still holding the lighter. The sound was like nothing I'd ever heard, pain and rage and something else, something ancient being torn away. I backed away from the growing flames and pulled the salt containers from my pocket. My hands were shaking so badly I spilled some as I unscrewed the first cap. I poured a thick line of salt across the doorway of the maintenance tunnel, making sure the line was unbroken from wall to wall. The entities appeared at the tunnel entrance just as I finished the salt line. All four of them crowded together, the fake Robert with his impossibly stretched face, the mannequin with limbs bent at unnatural angles, the flickering form of the elevator woman, and the benchman with his reflective animal eyes. They pressed forward but stopped abruptly at the salt line, unable to cross. I backed away, watching as the flames from the shrine grew higher. The badges were melting, curling in on themselves as they burned. The entities began to change before my eyes. Their forms wavered like heat mirages, becoming less solid with each passing second. The fake Robert was the first to start dissolving, his stretched face collapsing inward as his body turned to wispy gray mist. The mannequin followed, its plastic form seeming to melt away into nothing. The elevator woman's flickering form simply faded, her static sounds growing fainter until they disappeared entirely. The benchman was the last, those reflective eyes locked on me until the very end as his form dissipated like smoke. I stayed there, watching until nothing remained but empty air where they had stood. The fire behind me eventually burned itself out, leaving nothing but charred remains of the shrine. I sat with my back against the wall, exhausted beyond words, and waited for morning to come. When the first mall employees arrived, they found me asleep in the security office, slumped over the desk. I must have made my way back there sometime before dawn. The maintenance door was closed and locked, the salt line undisturbed. I handed in my resignation that same day, ignoring the confused looks and questions about what had happened to the security office door. 3 months passed. I found a new job at a warehouse across town, day shift only, and was starting to sleep through the night again without nightmares. Then my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Hello?" I answered. "Is this Marcus Thompson?" a young man's voice asked. "This is Richard Arnold. I'm the new night guard at Westfield Mall. I found your number in the employee records." My blood went cold. "What do you want?" "It's about these rules Brandon left for me," Richard said, his voice uncertain. "They seem really strange. Like, ignore anyone who looks like Gordon Webber after midnight, and something about mannequins on the upper level." I thought it might be some kind of joke for new employees. "Quit," I said immediately, my voice urgent. "Quit right now. Don't go back for another shift." "What? I don't understand." I heard it then, a faint squeaking sound coming through the phone, like wheels on a mop bucket rolling across tile. "Richard? Richard, get out of there now!" I shouted. The line went dead. I tried calling back 3 times, but each call went straight to voicemail. I sat there holding my phone, a familiar dread settling over me. The cycle had started again, with a new victim caught in the mall's supernatural trap.